So do you think, like you were homeschooled, right? Like your entire, like childhood educational years, like how would you weigh that? Because like I think there's like a myth, right, that like homeschooled kids are like weird and they're kind of like socially inept. And if you look at your Twitter account, like it's the furthest thing from the truth. Like you're brilliant. Like you're a very very like intellectual person. And if you someone were to be like, oh, she was actually homeschooled her whole life, people would be like, nonsense, right? Like you don't fit that mold. So I guess like where I'm going with that is like, how much do you think? Like your homeschooling, like, do you think that prevented you in like social situations in any way? Or like, how did you become who you are?
Yeah, I mean, so I actually think that there is an element of truth saying that homeschool kids are weird and socially inept. But I think it's like a little bit different than what most people mean it. Like, yes, they are weird and socially inept compared to non-homeschool kids, but like homeschoolers as a group tend to know how to interact with each other very well. It's just sort of an isolated community. And so they're very skilled, totally normal at talking with each other. It's kind of similar to like if you had somebody come from another culture and like come hang out with you, you might be like, they're kind of weird and socially inept. And it's like, well, that's true in comparison to like what you're expecting, but like they are good for, you know, compared to what they came from. So it's like hard to compare it directly. So yeah, I think I learned I'm a pretty classy homeschooler, if you will, among homeschooler culture. But I'm weird as balls out in the real world. And so it's really hard to adjust. Like when I entered the secular world, it was really alienating for quite a long time because it's difficult to explain exactly how much this permeates.
So I find, at least with a lot of the girls that I talk to, the ones that have gotten into adults, so I actually started with webcamming as well. And a lot of people were shocked because I was so like the shyest person always. Like I moved around a ton. I also had like a bit of an abusive like upbringing. So I just like tried to kind of like avoid people in general. Like I was always the new kid, and as a new kid you get bullied. So that just made me like a really quiet person. So when I started webcamming, obviously, like a lot of people were like, how, if you are so shy and quiet, can you be comfortable like taking off your clothes to like a room full of people? So was that progression, like, did it feel natural for you, or was it really difficult? Because when I did it, I was like, I'm home. This is wonderful.
I'm really happy to hear that. I kind of relate in the sense that I also was pretty quiet and shy and had like a weird upbringing. And yeah, people were surprised that I turned out to be such a performer. But it feels like a compartmentalized thing, right? Like sort of out in the world, it's a little bit outside of your control. And like people have the ability to hurt you in various ways, like, you know, through just rejecting your friendship even. But online, it's like suddenly it's a world that you're creating from scratch. And it's like this excitement of having this creative way to blossom socially. And there's like a kind of clear-cut rules also, like you take off your clothes and then they compliment you and you earn money. And so a lot of things about it feel a lot easier than real life socializing, actually. It took me a much longer time to sort of adjust to being naked because I'd been raised so incredibly conservatively. But it didn't take that long. And pretty soon I felt super comfortable in front of the camera.
And how would you say that affected maybe like your well-being once you started to get comfortable with like your being naked and being sexual? Because I recently did a Clubhouse event with a doctor, and a couple like neuroscientists popped up, and they were saying that there's kind of like an epidemic happening with like conservative men specifically, and it's because of like the shame that goes around sex, that they end up with much higher risks of like depression and a lot of like anger issues. And I know for me, like I was a very angry person too growing up, but like once I like really started to like fine tune my relationship with my sexuality is when I like started to kind of become like my most authentic self.
Yeah, that seems pretty true. I think for me, it was like the actually coming to terms with my sexuality is a much longer and still ongoing process. I think I still have pieces of me sort of baked in that like doesn't really know what the fuck I'm doing and is like freaking out about it. I think those are pretty small, and I think they're like quite like far away in that they don't really impact my daily experience. But yeah, there was a lot of anger in it, I think, that helped. And I don't think I did it out of rebellion, but I think that like the anger that I felt helped make me not feel ashamed about it. To be sort of like, well, I've been, suppressed so much that like this is sort of an expression of ownership, and like this is my body and I get to decide now what I do with my life. And there was like a little bit of rage in that. And I think that was really healing. Like it was sort of a therapeutic process to be able to work through that. I'm really curious about this. You said conservative men are more likely to experience shame. Is this opposed to conservative women?
I think it's just more prevalent, probably because, or maybe like women aren't like outwardly discussing their sexuality when these polls are being taken. So like that might attribute to some of like the skew. But specifically, they were saying that it's much higher in conservative men, and I think obviously like religion ties into that. And they the same data was also saying that they watch the most porn, like even compared to like like liberal men. So guys on the far right are consuming a ton of it, but then there's a lot of shame and guilt that goes with it, and that they tend to suffer from like higher rates of depression, which I thought was so interesting.